Well, good morning and welcome. Jill, if you could jump up and shut the door. I'm just teasing. I don't want anyone to leave when I tell you this is not the panel you were expecting. We have totally reworked it. There was sort of a perfect storm of speakers dropping out for a whole variety of reasons. So Mary Beth, on the program committee, and I have reconstituted this panel starting on Friday. Yes, Friday of the Memorial Day weekend. So we have one original speaker. Everybody else is me. So this is what happens when you're fortunate enough to live in the host city and know people that you can beg. Despite that, I think we have a terrific group. And what we're going to do today is have a pretty informal discussion. We hope it's going to be informal. I'm not going to take time to do long introductions. That's why the introductions are running on the screen and they're also on the handout. People are seated in the order they're listed on the handout, so I'm going to tell you who they are. Amira is a librarian at Northeastern University, seated by Korey Jackson, who's a librarian at Oregon State University. Korey was a student travel grant winner a few years ago. So this is showcasing our travel grant program. Peter Froelich is one of 3 publishers who's with us. Peter was also a travel grant winner as a student, the first travel grant award given to a student in a business school studying the business of publishing. And he is working at Indiana University Press. Then me, I'm your moderator. I'm October Ivins. I'm a past president of SSP, longtime fan of it. I'm so glad you're all here. 2 more publishers. Keith Seitter, who served on the board with me many years ago. He's here in Boston as the executive director of the American Meteorological Society. I never get it quite right. And our last publisher, Terri Teleen, who is with Wiley in an editorial?
Yes, as a publisher in the journals program in the academic division at Wiley.
Okay. And then we have 2 academics. First, Jean Bauer from Brown University. Jean is finishing her PhD and works as a digital humanities librarian. So she is an academic and a librarian. And then last, my dear friend, Rich Kesner, who is Sue Kesner's husband, another past president. Yeah, his claim to fame, right. And he is a professor in the business school at Northeastern University. Okay, so that's who we are. I would like to know who you are. Who is a first-time attendee? Excellent. Who has been to more than 3 SSP meetings? Okay. And now demographics. Students? Good. Librarians? Welcome. Publishers? Yay. Vendors? Thank you. Consultants? Well, it's really wonderful to have you all here and to have a full room. We have plenty of seats at the front, no need to stand. If there's an open seat beside you, please raise your hand so the people at the back can come sit if they want to. 5. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, our format for today, inviting people to speak on such short notice, we don't have prepared remarks. We're going to try to have an open discussion, kind of like The View, which I've actually never seen, but... Right. So I'm going to try to lightly moderate to just keep things moving. I have 2 questions for us to discuss. I'm going to time it for about 27 minutes for each question, and that will give us time at the end for your questions. So please make a note if there's something you want to follow up on, if there's something that occurs to you. You will have your opportunity at the end, and you don't want to forget those questions. So, okay. To start with, and Amira, I'll start with you. Our first discussion topic is, in terms of scholarly communication or scholarly publishing, thinking about your colleagues on the panel, what challenges do you face? What's a big challenge that you would like to explain to them?
Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I hope I don't strangle you. Okay. I'll move back. Well, the hardest thing about this question, I think, was trying to narrow it down. So I have 3 major challenges, and 2 I'm just going to mention briefly and maybe come back to at a later point, but one of them I'd like to concentrate a little bit more on. A major challenge, one of the ones I covered briefly, is budget. I'm not going to dwell on it. Our budgets are not keeping pace with the output of scholarly publishing and the increased pricing. And unfortunately, so I spent most of my time this year actually selecting publications for cancellation, and not being able to provide the research support to the campus that I really should be. And it wasn't fun. It's not really what I want to be doing my job, but so that's a major challenge. Number 2, a challenge that I'll sort of aim at the academics is it's a little frustrating trying to get the campus administrators and the faculty really interested in the issues of scholarly communication and the problems, and getting them interested in open access, retaining copyright, et cetera, and just the thought of paying significant prices for content that actually emanates from our campus and from others. So that's another challenge and a frustration. But I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about one of the most, a trend that's very challenging and, in fact, I think quite dangerous. And that is the trend of exclusive deals for content and metadata. I think it's dangerous for libraries, for researchers, and ultimately for publishers also. So there's 2 major types of exclusives that I kind of want to talk about. One is on the content side, exclusive deals that are being made with aggregators for content, such as the Harvard Business Review, which was one of the first with EBSCO. Libraries just aren't funded to purchase more than one large aggregation. And so either we're forced to buy more than one at the expense of other content that we really need, or we only buy one aggregation and we miss the exclusive content that's in another aggregation. And so the content is not getting the widespread dissemination that I'm sure you're hoping it does. So the publishers may be paid significant prices to keep their content in exclusive arrangement, but again, it's very damaging to the entire scholarly communication chain. Similarly, making a subject database exclusive to one vendor is equally damaging. And so, as a librarian, I would ask publishers and scholarly societies to resist the financial incentives and the pressure and to really think about the implications. And let's have some further conversations about this, because I think it's a very important issue. The other kind of exclusive deal that we're facing now is that of metadata. And I don't have time to go into all of the details. Libraries now, most of us have what we call discovery systems, which are replacing our public catalogs. And those discovery systems allow the users to discover what we have in the library, but also articles and other kinds of content out there. So we have a large problem now where some content providers are also having their own discovery systems, and so they withhold their content from other discovery systems. As a librarian, my contention is if I'm purchasing or leasing content, I have a right to display it in whatever system I choose to have available for my patrons. And again, there's a lot of pressure coming from vendors, there's financial incentives, but again, there's even been talk that some discovery systems won't do justice to your content or your metadata. That's baloney. We need your content in all discovery systems equally. If it's not there, I can tell you what will happen. Our users won't be able to get to the content because many of them are using just the discovery systems to find scholarly content. And then the usage figures are going to be low, and when I go to do a renewal, I'm not going to renew that item because the usage is low. And again, the most important thing is not getting widespread dissemination to all the researchers and scholars that I think we're all looking for. So those are my challenges. I hope I didn't go over.
That was great. So, and I think part of my point is I'm going to be echoing a lot of what Amira said in some ways, though. So I'm coming from the library, like my bio mentions, but I'm also involved in digital publishing. I now have the longest job title I've ever had in my life. It's the Gray Family Chair for Innovative Library Services, which is also a title that creates huge expectations to varying degrees of success. And with innovation in my darn job title, the challenge that I wanted to focus on was the opposite of innovation, the most conservative piece in the chain for me. And if what I'm trying to do is innovate digital publishing, the most conservative thing, the thing that is the biggest drag on any kind of innovation, is promotion and tenure requirements. And so for me, that has to be the starting place for a lot of these conversations. Every time someone has a great idea, whether it's a publisher for getting out different kinds of information, whether it's a library for figuring out how to supply scholars with new platforms for producing content, whether it's scholars themselves wanting to do something that they hadn't actually ever considered before they came to the library or came to an innovative publisher. The boat anchor that drags them back into conservatism is the promotion and tenure requirement, the guidelines that are provided from administration. And if we can find a way to crack that nut, or at least talk about approaches to cracking that nut, that would be, I think, a really great place to start. And this is, I don't want to jump the gun, I know we have a second question to answer, but this is, I think, one place where libraries and publishers of all colors, commercial, university, library, have a place to really consolidate around. If we can figure out an angle to bring scholarship at the requirement level into the 21st century, that would be something that I think can be the rallying point for a lot of these conversations. So I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Actually, you can hold it.
Oh, okay. That was great. I didn't know it. Well, thank you very much. First, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be on this panel with this group of people, and specifically because I think this addresses one of the challenges that I wanted to speak to. And to innovate, as we are all charged to do today, and to imagine new forms, we need each other. We need to know the pain points that scholars are feeling. We need to know what it's like to be an academic day to day, and we need to know what it's like to be a librarian day to day. And we need to know how these things add up to the new forms. We'll discover them best by knowing the pain points, as we say in business school. I'm also very excited to see someone with a business school on the committee, on the panel, but that's a little aside. But pain points are needs, wants, needs that need to be addressed, things that can be improved upon. We have at our disposal the most amazing tool ever created by mankind to date, and that's the library. No, That's the next, got to win some points, right?
Don't back up.
Oh my God. It is absolutely the library, and the greatest library of all, the internet. And the power that the digital world gives us can be used to do so many wonderful things. But together, we will discover them best, swiftest, and with the greatest depth. And I wanted to speak just briefly to these points specifically. Discovery, data exclusive, thank you for what I've heard today. These are very important points, and exactly where we should begin to address. So for all of you first time and all of you students, yes, focus on all these points that you're hearing today and think of the ways in which we can improve, because we need you. We need your brains to come up with the next solution. And go to Scholarly Kitchen and read up about each of these points when you go home from the session. But I think that this is primarily the challenge that I see, is I need more people to innovate. I'd like to deliver a new discovery system to scholarly publishing, but I need the help of scholars, librarians, and other industry professionals to develop that engine to build a new way of driving scholarship. And along the way, as we heard from both of our speakers in this innovative category, and as my panelist to my right just said, this new way of looking at tenure, this new way of looking at communicating, this new way of looking at data, we all need to get to. So we need to agree upon the mechanics that have changed so much, crowdsource them and build them so that we have shared systems that move quickly, and then start to innovate in a new discovering manner that would drive understanding and awareness at a higher level, which is what we all share in common, I think. And with that, I'm going to pass on.
Thank you all. Keith, before you get started, you have a very interesting perspective because as the executive director of a society, members are more important to you than authors or users. But you're also...
All the same people.
Yeah, but you're also a publisher and you have to deal with libraries. So I'm really glad you could join us with that unique perspective.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, and I think I would start by saying that something that I remind myself all the time is we're all in the same business. I mean, all of us are in the business of taking scholarship and getting it into the hands of other scholars. We each have a different role to play, but we ought to be working together, and sometimes it feels a little more adversarial than it ought to be. I'm going to shift gears a little bit from the innovation and discovery side of things in terms of the challenge that I thought of when we were discussing what we would talk about today is really in the open access arena. And I think open access is a challenge for all of us in lots of different ways. But the one that I want to highlight is one that I think doesn't get much airtime in a sense. And that is open access institutional repositories, which are kind of growing and becoming more popular. And an aspect of those is that many of those have a mandate for the faculty that says what is supposed to be deposited in that repository as an open access discoverable entity is the accepted manuscript. As a publisher, from the point of the accepted manuscript to the time it's published in final form, we do a lot of corrections. And so the concern that we have is that 2 or 3 months after the manuscript is accepted for publication, we put that content out in final form, and it's different than the accepted manuscript. And it does not do the scholarly world any good to have 2 versions of the same content out there, and one version that you know has errors in it, because the publication process getting to that final form is correcting things that are wrong. So one of the things that we've been trying to push very hard for is that institutional repositories only place the final published form in that open access repository, so there's only one version of that scholarship out there. And I think that's critical for the scholarly community, and we all ought to be on the same page for that. We find enormous resistance among the institutions that have these repositories to take that on, even though we allow them to use our final published form in their open access repository. It's a difficulty in terms of developing the process to allow that to happen. So that's one where I think we're not serving our community very effectively if part of the processes we put in place have multiple versions of the same scholarly work available to folks.
Great. Yeah, I have one. didn't test how long the string was. So my name is Terri, Teleen, and I'm with Wiley, and so I'm the commercial publisher in the group, and I wasn't always in commercial publishing. I actually was at the University Press at Northeastern before I came to Blackwell and then Wiley, and as some of you probably know, that press no longer exists, which I think is sort of, it's an interesting point, I guess. And
Talk about a challenge.
yeah, it points to a really big challenge in our industry. And I think, so now as a commercial publisher, I get into a room with the librarians and I sort of start to sweat a little bit. I'm not a salesperson, but I work on the editorial side. One of the hallmarks of our program at Wiley is that we work with a lot of societies. So my clients as a journal publisher at Wiley are very much, the kinds of have very much the same kinds of concerns that you just mentioned. And I think the challenge for us in working with societies to do publishing really comes down to this kind of reality that it costs money to do the work that we all do. And, maybe, yes, with a commercial publisher, there are shareholders in the case of Wiley. I mean, there's the Wiley family, major shareholder, still involved in the company. But I think, when I'm talking with directors, publications directors, editors of societies, I really have to have a hard conversation sometimes saying, you're running a business here, whether you like it or not. And you're running it because you need that money that the program generates in order to run your office, your staff, your editorial operation. And I think a lot of times academics who are running societies don't see themselves, I'm sure you do, but don't see themselves in that role. And a lot of society directors are volunteers. They're not sort of paid administrators. So that's a really difficult thing, and it encompasses all of the challenges that you've talked about. Open access. I work in the social sciences, and people say $3,000 APC. That is ridiculous. My grant is $500. But if you really break it down, you say, each article that you publish probably costs $5,000, $10,000 to produce under your current circumstances. It becomes a really big problem for people to sort of sort through. And just one final point along those lines, sort of in terms of innovation, what you said, Korey, about tenure, I think is really, we're all part of the same ecosystem, sort of as you guys mentioned. And I think, one of the resistance points that I still find is with print, with societies, and even with non-society journals, because we own some journals. We also publish with academic departments, universities, and even when you say to someone, realistically, there are 27 libraries taking a print copy of your journal at this point, they still do not want to give that up. And I think part of it's about tenure, part of it's about member benefits, and part of it is just sort of a reluctance to sort of take that leap and imagine what the world would be like. But in order to invest in really making that online content robust, we need to free up resources because there's no money in libraries. There's no more money. I mean, subscriptions are, flatline would be great. So it's a big problem, and I think this is a great conversation. My excuse for saying anything stupid today was going to be that I was a recent addition to the panel, but apparently everybody else is too. So I'll have to, stand by my remarks. But I think this is a great conversation to have, and I appreciate being included.
And while Jean is getting set up, there are seats in the front, and there are seats throughout the room. Once again, can I ask you to raise your hand if there's a seat beside you? You people standing, no need, please come have a seat. Yeah, and when we get to questions, I'm going to call on you if you're standing up. So
you can come up front, we don't bite. So hi, I'm Jean Bauer. I guess maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I'm the only original panelist. So I guess I better have something really good to say. But my title at Brown is Digital Humanities Librarian, which, like Korey and I were having this conversation before, for both of us, our titles are more conversation starters than descriptors of what we do. So if you've seen my bio either on the page or flashing behind you, you'll know that basically I'm a historian who builds databases. And I was hired by Brown. I'm also a photographer, so I got into graphic design and data visualization. I'm a digital humanist is really what I am, and a digital historian. And I was hired by Brown to be part of the Center for Digital Scholarship, which is a group of, it's a virtual center that combines people from the Subject Liaison Department, Research and Outreach Services, which is where I sit, and Digital Technologies, and we provide consulting and support to faculty throughout the entire university, but I and my colleague Ellie Milanis, who is the Senior Digital Humanities Librarian, have a specific role of collaborating with humanities faculty to create digital humanities projects. So really what Brown wanted was a historian who builds databases, who could go to talk to other historians and archaeologists and English professors about ways to use digital tools and methodologies to enhance their research and their teaching. So that's sort of what I do. And I got into this by having a background in history and a background in databases. And my mother's a novelist, so I grew up with the other side of publishing, so looking at scholarly publishing, particularly as a PhD, was very interesting. She'd ask me things like, so how do the royalties work? I'm like, not really. Not really why we write the books, or do anything. We're not, it's not the same business model. So as the Early American Foreign Service database, which is the primary engine of my dissertation, is an open source project that I built originally in Rails and now ported into Django. I'm also a programmer, is an open access repository of data about the early American Foreign Service, which I defined as 1775 to 1825, which is the subject of my dissertation, along with a series of visualizations, and it's built on an open source system called Project Quincy, which is the code that I wrote to power the website, and also to be of use to other historians who were interested in tracing historical networks through time and space. I work on information networks in the 18th century in the Age of Sail. And so what I do most of the time is I build open access web projects, whether they're databases or data visualizations. And so I am in the constant process of putting out open access content on the web using now the Brown Library servers to deploy the content, working with faculty. And for me, the biggest great thing about being at the end of the line is I can just give a nod to the tenure and promotion, eternal problem that Korey described so well. But the other thing that needs to come into this on the role of faculty projects, the kinds of things that people are trying to get credit for tenure and promotion, is that really the best way to build one of these things is to get it up and a little better than stumbling, but not up and running, up and walking, and then let it loose in the wild and go and present on it at conferences and talk to people and show it to the scholars in the field, show it to the teachers who are using it in the classroom, get feedback and iterate it, the rapid development process that also works for open source software code. Which brings really interesting questions when you want to talk about date of publication. Because also these projects don't really end. Because they don't have to be fixed in print, they can continue forever, hypothetically, until the web crashes and then we're all dead. But they don't have to stop. They can languish, but they don't have to. And they iterate. So how do you think about publishing when it's very easy to put something up? And the reason you put it up when it's not very good is because you want it to get better and you want that to happen in an open and transparent environment. And that is the best way to do it. So for example, a project, and then I'll stop, that I'm working on with Jim Egan, who's a professor in the English department, the Mapping Colonial Americas Publishing Project, where we are taking openly available metadata from our library catalog about rare books that are held at Brown, and we're creating a visual portal. Well, we have some ideas about how that would work, but we really want to have the students playing around with it and letting us know whether or not they're finding what they're looking for. And the scholars looking for it and giving us suggestions on how to build it better. So we put it up, and it was rickety at first. I'm about to rebuild it over the summer. And it's going to keep going and adding and growing. And how to think about that, and to think about what the benchmarks are, what the process is for dealing with that kind of continually, hopefully, iterating scholarship over the course of, who knows, 10, 15 years.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Richard Kesner. I'm a professor at Northeastern. I come from 30 years in industry. I'm in the field of information management. And around 11 years ago now, I moved over and have been teaching at Northeastern. So a few caveats. First of all, I'm not on the tenure track. And secondly, Northeastern's focus is on applied learning. So a lot of what we do in our use of content is to focus in on how to bring what we call experiential learning into the classroom, into the student experience. So how does this tie back in? We have the same issues around getting credit for publications and tenure and all of that. Doesn't apply to me necessarily, but certainly it's a big focus for my colleagues who are on tenure track, and the view of certainly of the administration is very traditional, top journals, etc. My own interest, and I think a growing interest in our school, and no doubt elsewhere, and this ties in, Gene, to what you've been talking about, is how do we create content for teaching? In the past, you would turn to textbooks. And my own research interest right now is on actually online learning. All of my recent publications in the last few years have been in that area. And it's really in creating learning experiences. I have a very sort of poignant experience now that I'm in the middle of with a major publisher about creating a textbook. Now, the interesting thing is that the publisher does not want to create another MIS textbook, nor do I want to author a textbook. What I want to author is a learning experience for my students, which would be digital, which would be accessible through a learning management platform, which would be engaging and interactive. So it has lots of components. Of course, in building that at Northeastern, I have control of the platform, and I can build it and I can direct it. Half my courses, by the way, are taught online. The other half are taught in the classroom. But all of my classes use what is called a flipped classroom model. That is, that students do the reading and prep before class so that we can engage in activity during class. It could be a small team activity. It could be individual interaction with the professor, but there is no lecturing involved. It's really engagement in different ways using different kinds of materials. So again, it's easy, relatively easy to do with digital products. You create and post to a learning platform and then let the students interact with them, and you provide direction and guidance. When you're trying to export this to another institution where you're not physically present, where you're not actually engaging the students yourself, another faculty member has to do that. How does that happen? What does it look like? The publisher I'm dealing with has said, well, we've got this exciting new learning, what they call the learning management platform. And I was excited too until I saw it. And when I saw it, I said, well, I didn't say this to them, but I said this to myself, this is really a very nice electronic textbook. And it has all the attributes of an electronic textbook, the ability to dive down and to annotate, et cetera, and to draw on resources outside the textbook. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't speak to the kind of learning experience that I'm trying to create in my classes and with my colleagues. So how does this relate back to publishing? Publishing, you need to have a product in order to make money, and I have no objections with making money. I'm at a business school after all, so I'm not entirely academic in that sense. But at the same time, how do we make these materials relevant and useful in the classroom, especially in an online environment? Major challenge.
Great. Well, thanks, Rich, and everybody. Well, I didn't warn you all, panelists, but I think we're going to flip our responses. So, Rich, to give you a second to collect yourself, since you spoke last, Jean, can I start with you? Then Rich will come back this way for our second question. Our second question is, again, in the context of scholarly communication and scholarly publishing, what about your role is misunderstood? What do you want an opportunity to explain, defend, whatever, with your colleagues and with the attendees?
Well, the fact that I took so long to explain what it is that I do when I introduced myself is part of it. But the main thing, I think, is that when you're talking about digital humanities projects, and that is mostly what I do, and publishing them in some sense, what you are looking at is you are always looking at a team effort. It might take a village, it at least takes a library, or something like a library, to put out the kinds of digital humanities projects that have become so well known, including the Mapping the Republic of Letters at Stanford, Nines, or the Rossetti Archive at UVA, Valley of the Shadow. All of these things are those are very large and very big, and so people know that there are huge teams behind them. But this kind of work it requires a project manager, really. And it requires typically a content expert, a technical expert, and a design expert, and one of the three of them has to be managing it. In the case of the Early American Foreign Service database, I am all those people, which is the other reason why I am still have not yet defended my dissertation, because it takes a long time. So when you look at these things, it's important to realize that there are a lot of people who are doing the work, and oftentimes there's one name on the project, and there may be a thank you page buried somewhere that lists everyone else who helped, but I think as the Zooniverse project, Zooniverse talk, which I'm still geeking out about, displayed, this kind of work, if you're dealing with anything at scale, it takes staff time at scale, whether it's academic, library, or otherwise. And the extent to which these projects are edited and shaped by their collaborators is really important. And so when you talk about in publishing and scholarly communications in the context of digital humanities projects, a lot of that work is happening, the work that an editor would do in a book, a traditional book. So taking a print dissertation and making a book out of it at a publisher where the editor would be doing that. A lot of that work and that collaborative shaping is happening within the project, and the design work as well that goes into it. And so in some ways, you've kind of taken the entire publishing model and moved it inside a DH project, particularly an open access one by the time it goes on the web. So just to think about that and to know that when you're looking at these things.
It seems to me, October, that the first question and the second question overlap some. And so I may be talking more about challenges than what you had intended, but still, there are a couple things that come to mind. And I referenced Jean before because it strikes me as Jean is creating the kind of content in her efforts that I would be using in my classroom as a tool. Like students, we want to sort of experience this particular point in history, and by the way, I'm an historian too, British Empire, but that was sort of like a generation ago. And so a couple things. One of them, the macro level, is working with my colleagues and working with content providers on how to actually teach a productive academic experience, how to create an academic experience in this online environment, because increasingly we are supplementing through hybrid structures or replacing. Like, for example, this fall I will for the first time teach a entirely online version of my day introductory MIS course. Two students who are in the day program, but are on their co-op year, and and this is an initiative that the president and the dean of our school and the provost have pushed, is creating alternative ways for students to get all of their credits in within the degree period when they also have co-ops to do. So conceivably, you take a course and you take while you're doing your co-op. Otherwise, before it was mutually exclusive. So there is that, and how do we create excellence in the learning experience in this new way? And That's a challenge, and it's something that requires a very collaborative environment with people like the publisher I'm dealing with, and obviously with various support groups within the institution, like Jean's type of team would be involved in that, library, Amira's team in Northeastern. We also have a Center for Learning, and they have expertise in how to actually teach in this way, and so that they're involved. So that's sort of one, the macro level. At the micro level, it's around creating content. And here we're very sensitive to copyright issues. It's not an issue for me when I'm writing, because I know it's original. But when I'm creating a slide, for example, and, again, my publisher said, well, we're going to have to redo all your slides. I said, why? I made them from scratch, but in fact, I took an object from Microsoft, and I took an object from the web, and I put them together and added my own content. It's not entirely, I didn't draw every little figure itself. So part of figuring out how to go forward, how to share this content with others, is how to sort of build bridges in that area.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree that the questions overlap a little bit, so my comments will probably reflect some of what I said before, but I think, I think that I'm here to represent sort of the commercial publisher side of the conversation, and I think from that perspective, one thing that I've, that's kept me in the industry and that I've always really appreciated about it is just I think the kinds of people who are drawn to work in publishing are very much of the same kind of mindset and, have the same kinds of interests. My brother works for Nike. He likes to market shoes. It's great. I don't do that because I want to be a part of the enterprise of, making scholarship available to people who need it and want it, and sort of advancing the conversation in all of these different disciplines. And so I think the part that's misunderstood from the publisher's perspective, again, is just that it costs money to do what we do. And yes, there may be profit margins for people. I have a family to feed, I need my salary. But I think that we are very much interested, I think, in having this kind of conversation and moving the whole system forward into something that's sustainable, because we all are dependent on that happening, I think, and on that working and on this industry thriving into the future. And I guess, as a person who works with societies, I really, I think that there's a real interest and goodwill on the part of societies also to be, part of this conversation. So I guess just from the publisher perspective, it's that, if I really wanted to really make the big bucks, I would have gone into investment banking. And I think there's a lot of kind of goodwill and real interest in making the system work for everybody in a way that's sustainable for each party going forward.
And I think I would just kind of follow up with that. I think as a society publisher, an area that I think is often misunderstood among many people is kind of the value that we add to the process, to the scholarly process. The peer review component of that is an enormous part of it in terms of taking the scholarship and making sure that it's worthy of publishing, it's worthy of dissemination. The editorial and other kinds of production work that goes into making the journals the best they can be in terms of the quality also adds a lot of value and is a process that, as I mentioned earlier, that finds lots of errors in the scholar's original work and corrects those errors so that what goes out is going to be something that can be looked at 50 years from now or 100 years from now with some assurance that it's correct. So I think that there's sometimes a misunderstanding of the publisher's role, that it's not just collecting stuff that we get for free and then selling it back to people. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens in between that makes it better, that makes it worth that process occurring and really improves the scholarship overall.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that and just touch on the fact that there's this great mechanical tool that we have that has made all of the things we're talking about possible, has made it change in so many ways, and every one of them will find solutions in the near future. For example, copyright and data. Well, if everything had metadata attached and everyone knew when you pulled something down what it was and how much it cost and it were done transparently, you wouldn't have to stop in your workflow. There's just one example. But everything will find that solution. What I'd like to reference right now, a TED Talk called Race with the Machines, and I've referenced it before, so some people are very, oh, I get one nod. You know what I'm talking about. And he talks about the last industrial revolution. I'm just going to steal his ideas for a moment. But do watch that TED Talk. It's brilliant. And he shows in the last industrial revolution, there was actually a dip in productivity and innovation after the revolution. That's counterintuitive. And then there's a huge evolutionary bump up. Right now, we have a wealth of tools at our disposal that we can, and we all are, creating with. We're all overlapping. I have the same tools at my university. You have the same tools at your university. Everyone's building the same tools because they see the same problems. What we really should be doing, and I think, to accelerate that dip, unless we want to stay in the dip for a long time, is to start to find these ways to collaborate and to crowdsource these tools and to build these things more quickly. That's not the exciting part for me. The exciting part is, the tools are, I don't want to take away from them, they are incredibly exciting, and they make many more things possible more quickly. But that evolutionary step, the accelerant part of the curve, that's about to come, the things that we can do there are what we want to get to. So, the two are kind of different. And the reason I pick up on what Keith said is that mechanical part is a lot of what people focus on who are outside of publishing, who say, that's published. Oh yeah, you made it accessible. You delivered it. And that's publicare, that's the Latin, we know that, to declare it in an open space. But that's not the work of publishing. The publishing work is ameliorative, is improvement, is synthetic. So where will we get to, when will we get to those places we can get to now with the web? And it overlaps with tenure, and it overlaps with other things we said. For example, blogs, not traditionally seen in the tenure currency accounting, but should be. And they're starting to talk about this more and more. Well, we as publishers have the same limitations. We're expected not to produce blogs of an academic's nature because they might not be relevant. What we have produced must be relevant. So we're restricted in what we do. We're all going to have to take our hands together and jump in the cold water together to go to that new place and to find those new forms that will be, because we say they should be, valuable to the next generation. And I think that's it in a nutshell. The only other thing I wanted to add that about what we do and in that value structure that I'd like people to remember is there's a book that's #1 in the country right now from a university press. Why is it #1 in the country? How did that happen? And what is at work there, and what does that mean that it's #1 in the country? I mean, in some ways, it's popular, it's entering the discourse, which is our ultimate goal. But also it did so because of an old traditional financial commercial mechanism. Now, how will that change? That will change in many different ways, but what we have to safeguard is its ability to have that kind of impact. And if we can do that better without paywalls and without that commercial enterprise, I'm all for it. But as we heard this morning in the keynote, granting access is not raising awareness. There's a threshold issue that comes into play when people see things. And I'll tell you, if you say they can't have it and you put a price tag on it, they want it all the more. I mean, we know this is the case. I'm not saying it's permanent and that's the way we should have it, but we have to be mindful of what we're developing and why we're developing it. And I think there's lots of answers to that question, but those are the right questions to be asking. And we look at the ways in which we can derive value in that sense. There's many, many, many business models. There's just so many ways to make money. It's not a concern, so we needn't restrict ourselves to the traditional ones. Thanks.
Oh, here I go.
So, speaking of capital, I was trying to think, so I guess I'm the first in line representing the library, which is tough. I mean, part of me wants to, no, actually I am going to just sort of pitch in, because I think the tenor of the conversation so far has been around, hey, we're not actually that different, right? We actually are trying to get information into people's hands in a way that helps to amplify that information and make it more effective. The space where antagonism appears is in the realm of capital, and I think that's something that's important to acknowledge, that that the process of bringing knowledge into the space of cultural capital, tenure and promotion, and just the things that accrue around producing content for a public, is part of the process. The other part of the process is making sure that cultural capital turns into real hard, cold cash. And I think the assumption, and this is where I'm addressing the question of like what assumptions or misunderstandings might accrue around your institution or your role, and I'll speak for my institution, as dangerous as that is that libraries are allergic to capital, or that we misunderstand it, or that we misunderstand capital impulses. And it's not true, or it's sometimes true to our discredit. So one example, when I first came from, and I was coming from the library from an English department, from a humanities degree, so I was new to the library 3 years ago, and I drank the Kool-Aid hard. Like I fell in I really did feel this push toward open access, toward open content, toward open source development in a real way, and still see the benefits of that. But I also see the kinds of antagonism, the kinds of revolutionary rhetoric that come out of that movement as potentially dangerous. So here's what happened, is I'd had a lot of Kool-Aid, and then I gave a talk to a webinar to the SSP. And most of those folks were from Wiley, from Springer, from Elsevier. They were consultants. They were not librarians. That talk did not go down very well. And the question that came up was actually from a colleague of mine in the travel grant cohort who was working at Wiley. And she said, so what do you think publishers can do? Like, you think you can do it all? Like, hey, library, so if you're so great, you do it.
For no money.
For no money. And she didn't say it. Sorry, I'm mischaracterizing her. She was very, very, very politic. But that was the basic gist of the question, was like, if you're so great, you do it. And why is it so hard for you to get out there and do it? And it actually gave me pause, because I started thinking about all the value adds that commercial and other kinds of publishers actually bring. And it isn't just about getting free content and pushing it out there. The process of amplification, the process of making content worth something is a hard process, is a process that takes money, people, effort, etc. And I think libraries are beginning to understand that and do want to work toward a compromise that isn't just, let's shut it down with open access. And so I think if we can come to a space where it's not just a lot of revolutionary rhetoric, but that it is moving toward more openness, I think that's where I would love to get to. And I don't think that's just trying to sell peach pie and rainbows. I think there is a real benefit to thinking what a compromise solution would be outside of the extreme poles of commercial only, closed only, or open only, open access only.
Good. And going the other way, I'd echo a lot of what Korey said. So what's misunderstood? So I'm just going to talk a couple minutes about the topic I glossed over earlier, which is budget and funding. So I want to reiterate, we're not trying to put a squeeze on publishers. We understand that companies have to make money. I worked at several vendors, and I know that, there's a bottom line that, there's a real problem in the whole scholarly communication chain, and we do have to work together to find answers. One of the misconceptions that I just want to say is that library funding is not necessarily, and most of the times, not proportional to the university's expansion or growing research agenda or hiring faculty. So you can't judge my library budget by what you're reading in the papers about Northeastern and its great expansion. And that's hard to explain, and it's frustrating. Another thing is that higher education today is global and distributed online, as Rich said, and I think it no longer makes sense to charge for additional regional or international sites. It's all part of my university. It's all part of the users that I need to serve. And the users are part of the university, they're counted in our FTE, so we're already being charged for them. We can't support all of these significant charges for additional sites. I mean, some publishers are asking me to pay 6 times the cost of a resource if I have 6 regional sites, even if the FTE is maybe 20 in a couple of the sites, and that subject isn't even taught there. So there's a limited budget. We can't do it. So I think we have to sort of think about higher education, its global nature. Every campus now is going to have regional sites. And so we need a new model there. And we just need to think about that. The other thing is that we have a limited budget. Our funds are not unlimited. And something's got to give. So, you know, well over 90% of my budget is recurring subscriptions, et cetera. Scholarly monographs, I have very little money for. And so we have to, again, come up with new models to allow people to have access to the scholarly monographic content. And I'm not giving any solutions here, but it's a misunderstanding that we have the same kind of money that we had for books. And also, just a plea, you know, my budget is limited, just like an individual's budget is limited. So I don't care if you've added more content or so-called raise the quality of the content or have a new platform. I just don't have the money. And so something's got to give. So we're not trying to put a squeeze on the publishers. We do have to cancel. I mean, something has to give. I would be fired by Will Wakeling back there if I go over my budget. And so I just don't have unlimited money. We were flat budgeted this year. At most, libraries are maybe 2 to 3%. And so double-digit increases, which we're still seeing, just don't fly. So the other thing is that at the end of the year, sometimes because of lapsed salaries or other money, we can do one-time large purchases. And I take into account very much those publishers that have been reasonable and work with us. I think it's conversations that we have to have together. And so I will actually purchase additional content more likely from those publishers that have been willing to work with us. So again, publishers need to make a profit. They need a very important part of the chain. That's not what we're saying at all. We realize that. We just have to find a way to make it sustainable for everyone. Thanks.
Well, thanks to our panel, as you can see, I could have picked any 3 of these people. We could have done traditional presentations and still taken up all the time and more. This is such a rich discussion. But it's your turn now. What questions do you have? Please identify yourself and let me know if the question is for a specific person or for the panel. So don't be shy. I said I was going to call on the people standing up. Okay, yes.
My name is Elizabeth Garrett, and I work for the American Accounting Association, which publishes business research journals. This is a completely kind of ignorant question, but I kind of just want a little bit more backstory. So tuition kind of rates are going up at the universities, especially where I live. Can you tell me a little bit about, from the library angle, why your budgets are flatlining and going down?
Yeah. Amira, can you restate the question before you answer it so people in the back can hear it?
I'm answering it.
Yeah.
The question was just a real question. I'm interested if tuition is going up and the institutions have more to work with, why are library budgets flat or going down? I don't think I can answer that. Of course, there's a lot of competing costs. There's, technology costs, there's all kinds of costs across the university. I can't really answer that, and, we think about that all the time. Why doesn't the campus appreciate our value more and understand, the cost that we have? We get our budget from the provost, and Will might want to help me out here, but, and the budget is set and it's flat. And I do understand, from the campus's point of view, that if the resources keep going up and up and up, and we need more and more resources, and now we're being requested by digital humanists to get huge databases that can be used for data mining and text mining, and we just can't afford that, that it's a bottomless pit. And I understand that the campuses can't, just keep giving and giving and giving. But it is frustrating to us that it seems to me that our budgets are not commensurate with new research programs, et cetera, on campus. So I can't really answer it. You should ask a provost.
If I may just jump in, because my job isn't at stake. When you look at any university or any corporation, they have strategic priorities, and the resources tend to go to those. Northeastern, like any other university, has announced its priorities, and they're not in some of the more traditional services like the library, although there's been a lot of remarkable development at our library in terms of learning space and offerings. But I think that, as you look at the competition for the university dollar, and despite the fact that tuitions seem to go at hyperinflated rates, you're still seeing the money going elsewhere. And the librarian, like a lot of other established stakeholders in the university, is getting less of the pie for that reason.
Yes. Hi, I'm Kathy Dernoga from the American Society for Testing Materials. We publish standards, and we also publish books and journals.
Can everybody hear Kathy in the back? Okay, great.
So we publish books and journals, and I just did another author survey, and the authors are never represented in any of these meetings, and the authors say, yeah, Praxis sounds cool, but no, I don't need it, no, and they're 80% academics. No, I'm not required to publish an academic. Now, maybe these mandates haven't filtered down to what they're working on yet. What's CCBY? Does that mean I have to chase down people that are stealing my stuff, or that I signed on the bottom line saying they could take it? They're very confused. They don't have any information. And in the meantime, I have to go to my boss, just like you, and say, okay, now I want to spend our budget on new IT systems to figure out how to collect money from 10 different authors, from 10 different locations, because collaboration is what everybody's going for. Change all these core business systems, have no subscription income. The authors are telling me they don't have money to pay the charges. So, I don't know, it's kind of a very dubious position for all of us publishers to be in right now, and try to sell this or not sell it to our management team.
Take a stab. I'm throwing myself into the breach, as Will said earlier today. First, just to answer the question seriously, CC BY license just means attribution. It's wide open. There's also ND and NC, which are a little bit, I think we're gravitating towards as an industry, using them all. And I want to just give one voice to that, that's non-distributive, or it's non-derivative and non-commercial. And if you think about it in a translation sense, which is my area, you don't want anyone picking up and making a translation in any country and having 15 different versions of your work. So it's a very important move on one point. Just wanted to mention that. And if anyone has questions, let me know. Then on the commercial side, this is the plight we're in currently, that the finances are being pulled away, and we have to shift and build new ones on the fly, a little like redesigning the bicycle as you're riding it, and that's difficult. That's a spot that we're in right now. So the idea that the budgets are falling, I wanted to take a stab at that too. I think there's an increasing presumption on the part of universities that we're seeing things go OA, so we needn't invest as much in the content and pull it down. But as our publisher, Kathy, as Kathy just pointed out, right now more than ever, publishers need revenues or need money to redesign and rebuild so many things that it's really a difficult kind of time. And it's one that we share with libraries, actually, because our budgets, both of our budgets, if you think of the revenue as a budget, which we do, are tight and only getting tighter. So we at Indiana are blessed. We've been reformed together to work on these problems together. We're in a library. And we also have these advanced, like I said, delivery systems, and we work on flipped classrooms and all of these concepts. But it's an exceptionally challenging time. And I don't think I have a very good answer other than it's an exceptionally challenging time. And that in the near future, perhaps, we may.
And I would add, back in the days when I was in libraries, the budget I worked with was based on a quota by enrollment. So you got more points for a faculty member, so you got 10 for a faculty member, 7 for a graduate student, 1 for an undergraduate major. And the budget was divvied up departmentally and by discipline that way, except for interdisciplinary things. Well, now so much of it is interdisciplinary, that breakdown has kind of eroded. So you don't have these areas where, because we used to try and balance it. We used to say, well, the humanists haven't spent all of their money, we need to encourage them. You don't do it that way anymore. Libraries have really had to pull faculty input and control out because there's not enough to cover everything. So from my perspective, sort of sitting between libraries and publishers, it's kind of user demand. If the administration was hearing students and faculty say, we don't have the resources we need, you'd hear about it. But there's such an abundance of resources, unless something is required for accreditation, you pretty much don't hear that. And I don't know, Amira, Will, Korey, does somebody want to dispute that? I don't hear a lot of student outcry.
I could add just one thing as an attempt to answer Kathy, too, that I wanted to mention. First, I wanted to thank you for mentioning that faculty are rarely at these meetings. I have thought for a long time that the AAUP and the AAUP should get together and have a joint meeting.
It's not that we didn't invite them.
Yeah, and we should. In fact, we should. That's why this is a terrific panel and a rare one that you're all privileged to see. But we should do more of this and more collaboration with faculty. The other I'll throw out there as a possible answer, the public. And also as a correction to our stakeholders, for university presses in particular, we're not just getting content, scholarly content into the hands of scholars, we're getting scholarly ideas out into the world to advance the debate, the public debate and the political debate, or the citizen debate, I should say, to correct myself per our speaker today. And therein, in the public sphere, and in creating new ways of making that information accessible and interesting, we may find new revenue. I'll throw that out there.
Other comments on, Jean, please, go ahead.
Yeah, speaking as an author who publishes my work both in peer-reviewed scholarly journals as well as through the open access projects that I work on, it comes down to, I've noticed that everyone who's asked a question so far, and maybe this will bring out some other people who are in the room, are scientific or less humanities journal publishing. One of the things that happens a lot with the rising costs is that the humanities resources are sort of quietly cut from library budgets. And one of the things that happens in libraries, and where I now work for about 3 years, is that we want to make things run smoothly and we want to help people. And there isn't often enough explanation of why we're cutting things. And so we go to the humanities people. I'm also the subject liaison for English and American Studies. And, so it's partly my job to explain, why the poetry journal isn't getting renewed. And but it's so small. But these science journals are so very, very expensive. And so there's a distribution of resources within the library that gets shifted. The other thing about open access is that it really depends on what kind of work you're doing and the nature of the kind of scholarship that you put out. So as a diplomatic historian, there isn't so much that kind of cutting edge, it must be, within a year it's going to be, my reinterpretation of John Adams and the Model Treaty is not going to hopefully be out of date, hopelessly, in 12 months. So I'm perfectly happy to wait for the 2-year embargo to go away on my article so that it can go, and I do understand that this costs money. On the other hand, when I can't access works, even working at Brown or back at UVA, that I was part of, that I contributed a great deal of work to, because my library can't afford to buy them, even though my scholarship is in them. That's a very difficult place to be in. And so I am not advocating burning things to the ground, but I do think that if you're looking at a humanities journal and you're looking at where the work is going and where a lot of the peer review and the editors are volunteers. I am a peer reviewer. I do peer review work for journals. I mostly do it for open access journals. But, there's a lot of time and effort that's spent within the scholarly community putting these things out there. And then the question is, what right do we have to our own work? So it's complicated, and it depends largely on whether or not you're in a field where your work can be patented or not, whether or not, what the profit margins are for the kind of things that you're doing. And the humanities often really get squeezed pretty hard. And they're getting squeezed a lot, and we keep hearing about crises in the humanities and whether digital humanities is solving the crisis of the humanities fast enough, or whatever else it is we're supposed to be doing while we're just trying to make our projects and advance our scholarship. So it's very complicated, and the humanities side of things, I think, is quite different. And a humanities journal, as far as I can tell, works quite differently and has a very different economy than a science journal, and we're being stepped on. So sometimes we push up.
So, more questions? Jill, yes.
My question, and this is for the entire panel, because I think everybody has to be willing to stay up front what they're willing to do. But what sacrifices are you willing to make to move this forward? Are libraries willing to sacrifice quality and depth of an information resource, whether it be a journal or a database? Are publishers willing to sacrifice revenue streams and branding? Are authors and instructors willing to sacrifice some of the prestige that they've been relying on for promotion and tenure? What is your particular sector willing to give on?
Well, I've got a mic. I gave up tenure track to work on this. I mean, I not give up as in like I had it and I turned it down, but I never went on a traditional academic job search coming, I went to a library because I wanted to build open access content, because I wanted to use the skills that I had to help other scholars develop the kinds of projects that would hopefully, knock on wood, with the help of a lot of other people, not just me, impress universities enough that they would change the kinds of promotion and tenure requirements, because if they didn't, they were going to start to look silly, because the Center for Digital Scholarship does amazing work. And we put together resources that are really phenomenal and that people rely on around the world for their teaching and their scholarship. And so instead of going into trying to break into the traditional faculty track, and we can talk about whether or not tenure will exist in 5 years, I really decided that what I wanted to do was I wanted to spend my life working with other people on their projects and their research and and using my skills to help get their ideas out there in the best way possible. Using a library, using open access, and using all of, the resources that the Brown Library was willing and that I advocate for them to put toward these projects. So it takes people who are willing to work on things other than their own scholarship. On the faculty side of things, you have to be willing to collaborate and to be a co-author rather than a single author, and you have to be willing to listen to people who are programmers and are librarians and have specializations that you did not study in graduate school, to be able to put these things out there and then advocate with them for why they count.
I don't want to lose my job either, but I'll go on a little bit of limb and just say, at least from my experience at Wiley, I think there's a revenue issue in academic publishing generally that's sort of creating sacrifices, whether we like those or not. So I think a lot of commercial companies in in this industry are reorganizing, offshoring, outsourcing. There are redundancies. Colleagues who we've worked with for a long time. I see a colleague in the audience here who are no longer with us, and I don't think I'm sort of airing any dirty laundry by saying any of that. I think it's pretty public. Everyone knows that that's what this industry is going through, and I think that the sacrifice that we're making is that kind of sort of cultural sacrifice, and also the risk to our business that because of these changes, we won't, the products won't be as good, our partners won't want to continue to work with us. I'm not sure that's a very good answer, but I think that there's it's not sort of volunteering a sacrifice, but I think there are, it's a very low profit growth industry right now, I think.
Yeah. If I could just say something very quickly about the academic. I think that academics need to think more about who their audience ought to be. I don't know about anyone else in this room, but a day doesn't go by when I'm not solicited by some online journal to make a contribution to that journal, even though most of the journals I get emails from don't have anything to do with anything I work on. But so if this is happening, there must be a huge groundswell of pressure to publish in academic journals and to speak to other academics. And I don't denigrate that. That's how academic ideas get fostered and grow. But there are other audiences, and I think some of the other panelists have alluded to this, and that the universities, I would point the finger at the universities themselves, the research universities, that promote this obsession with academic scholarship and narrowing the focus of what it should be and who it should speak to, rather than recognizing that our main commitment is to actually educate, and that is not to other academics, it's to students who are going into all kinds of jobs and into society, and that they need different kinds of materials, different kinds of content, different kinds of learning experiences than other academics. And if you looked at the huge amount of energy at a university that's devoted to talking among ourselves, and factor that against how little we spend trying to improve the quality of the learning experience, it's pretty shocking. So I think that's where a real sacrifice needs to be made.
Well, I'll jump in as a society publisher in terms of what we've done to sacrifice. We've got a couple of our staff members here who are carrying the brunt of this, but I think we continue to try to do more with less. The volume of content that we publish is growing because our science has been growing at a phenomenal rate. Our price per page as a metric has been going down pretty continuously, so we keep finding ways to do things cheaper and faster and better through the hard work of the staff. And so I think the sacrifice happens that we keep asking our staff to do more and more and more to maintain an extremely high quality so that the science is served, but do that in ways that that don't have us have to raise the prices to libraries because we know the pressure they're under, that allow our authors to continue to publish with us without having the pressures of author charges go through the roof. All those sorts of things, that all those different pressures together really come down to having us as the folks who work on the journals become more and more clever about how we get things done so that the quality is maintained, but the price doesn't have to go up.
I could add one thing, that I would sacrifice nothing, other than acknowledging that we're sacrificing a great deal already. But I would invest things, and I would see it that way, not as a sacrifice, but as an investment in the community and the greater goals that we all share. So one thing that I would invest would be perhaps modified dissertations. It may sound like more of a sacrifice, but these are some things that we often publish at University Press. They're mildly modified for a general reader, but they don't successfully get there. And yet we have to do a great deal of work on them, and these would be much probably better suited for open access and library publishing. And something that we haven't mentioned yet here, I think, have we? Our library publishing that's grown nationally, so that many library programs have started and always had publishing programs, but have grown them robustly, considerably. And these kinds of complementary services that we can provide scholars will, in one sense, it would be sacrificing all those projects, but I don't see it that way. I'd see it as investing in their publishing program and the strength and attractiveness of their publishing program, and in ours in the future. And the other things that I would invest would be strategic points of competition. Traditionally, any standalone business is going to compete on everything you do, whether it's email lists or your personnel or the business practices that you have. Certainly, we compete on authors and our IP and our content, but we compete on absolutely everything we do. And I would invest some of those unique business practices in the group and share them more and more. And it's something we do terrifically as scholarly communications, as opposed to commercial communications, beyond the scholarly commercial, of course. But it's something we do terrifically well, but we can do even more of it, but with strategic collaboration of our platforms, the things we're building, and the practices that we've always relied on.
And I can address the question from the point of view of the library. I mean, to me, the question is for the library maybe is a little bit more like, what will you pay for? And I can tell you that one of the major reasons that libraries are moving into the realm of content production and publishing, library publishing, or publishing in general, however you want to phrase it, is because content is really easy to put out to the public. It's not that hard to get content out there. It's really, really hard to amplify that content and make it discoverable. And libraries are still not good at it. I'll cop to it. We don't know how to do it. And that's exactly what we'd be willing to pay for. From my perspective, and I'll let Amira address this too, but starting a digital publishing operation at a regional state land-grant school is an interesting experience, to say the least. What I know from this experience, and it's only been 6 months since I've been there, so take that for what it's worth, is that content is not hard. I'm cool with content, but I don't know the first thing about robust discovery and robust metrics for citation. I mean, I can look to some of the services that are popping up. I can talk to vendors here at SSP, but I can't develop those things in-house, and I'm not going to. I can't pay for it. I can pay for those services, though, and I think that's something that commercial publishers should take a really hard look at. That's one growth area that libraries are really looking toward. So I would be willing to pay for that.
Well, and one thing I've observed in libraries over my career is there's a lot of shifting from getting rid of the routine, shifting things to technology or to just not doing them, to streamlining processes. So that started out on the technical services side, which has been pretty much deprofessionalized, leaving, just a few managers in place with a lot of support staff. Now we're seeing it on the reference side, where there's there's a lot of outreach, but to enable the outreach, librarians don't do so much talking to classes. They don't appear in the class and do something. Their administrators would rather see them put the time into creating a video tutorial that the student can use at point of use. There's this whole new trend in libraries called embedded librarians, where the librarians are online with the faculty member in a distance education class, offering suggestions and observing. So it's kind of follow the user. What is the user needing, and how do you adapt to that? How do you get into the user's workflow? And I think that's really the challenge for everybody. It's a challenge for publishers. You want to be in the author workflow so you're not a burden on them. It's a challenge for libraries. I mean, everybody's trying to make it easier for whoever your user is.
What strikes me about this conversation is something that, of course, I talk about in my classes, and that there is a supply chain problem here. And when you think of a traditional supply chain, those people don't view themselves as competitors, they're partners. And I may be handling logistics, you may be handling warehousing, someone else is handling manufacturing, but unless we're all working together, it doesn't happen. And here we have content creation, content distribution, and the selling of it, whatever. There are different rules to be placed, and it seems to me that a fundamental conversation has to be had about what are the respective roles of the library, the author, the publisher, and how, what is their territory, how do they overlap, how do they coordinate, and then how does the money flow?
Before I conclude us, because we are going to take a couple more questions, I just want to say before we break up, what's coming up next at 12:15 is the awards luncheon. It's a seated luncheon. The awards are going to be at the dessert course. So if you need to make a call, do anything, it's better to go late than leave early, because we want you there to celebrate the award winners. Okay, back to our questions. I think you had one.
I had a question for Amira. I'm John Riley from Kesner. How has patron-driven acquisitions worked out for you? Is it part of it? How disruptive and how valuable?
Okay, so the question, yes, I will. Yeah, I thought I would. So the question was, how has patron-driven acquisitions worked out from the library's point of view? For those, well, most of you being in publishing probably do know what it is, but it's basically a program whereby we can make content available and then we only purchase it as it's used. In a nutshell, for the library, it's been a godsend, I have to say. It allows us to make content available. It very much helps us implement the, instead of having things just in case somebody uses it, we want it just in time we want to make it available if they need to use it. So for us, it's been wonderful. It's been a good model, and it's the only thing that really allows us to make scholarly monographs available to our users, because we just don't have the budget otherwise. However, we do realize that it's not been such a terrific model for publishers, frankly, and that especially the whole short-term loan issue is now rising to the fore. And I would just urge us to keep having conversations to try to work out what is a sustainable model there, but it's been very, very good for libraries.
Yes, here in the front.
Rather than a question, I have more of a comment. I think I'm a unique species in the room. I'm a faculty, I'm in the business school, and I'm a journal editor. So one thing that that's why I'm coming here and I'm missing in this conference, actually, I miss faculty. Yes. And I thought maybe in one of the idea of the outreach of this organization is to start explaining to faculty what you've just been telling, because I think most of the faculty, I'm from Fordham University, we have a big university press, and when I try to speak to my colleagues about the role of all of you stakeholders in the way we scholars contribute, and we need you, this is what we're talking about. I think there's a very big disconnect of the problems here and the problems that faculty have. Tenure track, in convincing our administrators to give money to libraries, and they are all, after a certain stage of their career, they are there, they're making those decisions. So one, if I can do a sort of a request for you, please try to reach more to faculty.
Would you like to Would you like to join our membership committee?
Why not? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there one last question, or are we at an end? Okay, please help me thank our terrific participants. And thank you all for your time and attention. It's really nice to have you with us.
Nice meeting you.